Good evening, everybody. We're going to give it a little bit more time. The numbers are still climbing up, so we'll check back in a couple of minutes. Okay, good evening, everybody. We will get started. The numbers are starting to level off some. So good evening. I'm Frank Hackett. I'm the superintendent of schools. And with me tonight is Mr. James Lee, assistant superintendent, Mr. Jeffrey Rubin, director of student services, Dr. Milo Kippenham, assistant director of special services for elementary, and Dr. Petra Platt, assistant director of special education services for secondary. What we want to do tonight is go over some slides with you to try to give you a general overview and outline of where we are as by way of an update for our special services programs, and also kind of give you and let you know that we are, there's still some outstanding questions that we're working on. Some of those are unrelated to special services directly, but more related to our facilities in general opening. So we'll try to cover some of that. What we want to do also is just make sure that you understand that we do not want to get into individual questions about individual students tonight. There will be some follow-up communications next week that will begin specific to the programs and to levels where those questions would be more appropriate. If it is obviously a confidential or personal question, you should have that discussion directly with a special education administrator or teacher. We will take questions at the end. We ask that you stick to one question. We'll do the best we can to get through everybody that wants to ask a question, and then if there's time, we'll loop back around to give people a second chance. I say that every time we've had a meeting, and generally what happens is I get 3- and 4-part questions, so I really ask you if you can refrain from that. I promise you, if we get through everybody in the time allotted, that we will make a second round. We have about 225 attendees right now, and we already have 5 hands up, so those of you who don't have your hand up, don't panic. We'll go through the presentation first. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your more general questions. And then again, at the end of this, we'll take questions. So the meeting is being recorded. I want to make sure everyone knows that. And that's just for the purpose really of being able to post this and allow people who may not have been able to make it this evening to watch it on our website, which we will be posting this sometime tomorrow. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to turn off my face, which you're welcome, everybody, and share my screen. So again, we are recording the meeting. Tonight we're going to go over three kind of basic areas and try to get to some details as quickly as we can. I want to talk a little bit about our general schedule, where we are with general education. Mr. Lee is going to give some additional detail on the schedules by level. He'll talk about both hybrid and remote learning as well. We will give some detail on our pre-K through 5 programs and services, and also our grades 6 through 12 programs and services. And then we will open it up for questions. I'm probably, unless you have specific questions related to the general schedule, facilities, that kind of thing, I am hopefully just going to be moderating tonight. We have the following people present, as I've already mentioned. So we have all of our levels covered. And so just to start, just a few kind of overarching details. The plan is to begin school still on September 16th, which is a Wednesday. That in our hybrid schedule actually turns out to be a remote day. That is true for general and special education students overall. The general education schedule, and there will be some more specific detail on special services schedules later in the presentation, but for the purposes of everybody, grades K through 8 will be in a hybrid schedule of 2 in-person half days and then 3 synchronous / asynchronous days. Mr. Lee will give some more detail on what that means in a bit. And Braintree High School, as was recently decided, will be starting full remote with a targeted date of hybrid implementation on Tuesday, October 13th. We have multiple crews right now working on the high school. The reason for the delay primarily is to deal and try to make sure that our interior classrooms specifically are ready to go. The interior classrooms are fed by rooftop units, which obviously are original to the building. We're working with a couple of engineering firms to tweak the systems there, and also to look to see what kind of other steps and measures we can take to mitigate, to make sure we are getting enough fresh air exchanges into those rooms. And then the pre-K and high school programs and services are still scheduled to be held at the high school. We're going to be using exterior rooms only. Those rooms that we will be using are almost done with any work that they will have. We will have the air exchange assessments on those rooms specifically done prior to the start. That will be public information. We'll make it available to you. So we are still on schedule right now to begin those programs in the high school on September 16th again, which is remote, so really the 17th. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lee and have him walk you through our opening schedules and information. Mr. Lee, you're muted.
Yeah, but you did get to see my picture. Apologies. So this is a slide that we have shown several times in the course of conversation around how much time synchronously, meaning on a Google Meet, or even using this as an example of Zoom call, is appropriate. And so when we looked at this work, part of what we looked at were the recommendations from the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. And at the elementary level, they recommend no more than 2 hours a day in that type of environment. And at the middle school and the high school levels, 3.5 hours is their recommendation. And so as we talk about, we've had parents ask, why aren't my children on a Google Meet all day long? A lot of it relates to the fact that we don't see that as productive or effective in terms of teaching, and nor is it the way that we currently teach in our classrooms, even pre-pandemic. So there is a balance between that synchronous work and a lot of the asynchronous and collaborative work that happens as well. Next slide, please. Just to remind people, there had been questions about how we were going to cohort students. For us, those students who would come to school in person on Monday and Tuesdays, last names would begin A through LE. And those students who come in person on Thursday and Friday would have last names beginning with LI and Z. We have talked about the fact that we will make adjustments for students with different last names who live at the same address. In fact, we have the capacity to run a report that tells us who's living at certain addresses, and we've already begun making those adjustments. And there may be some final tweaks to the cohort work between now and the end of the school year. Beginning of the school year. Thank you. So a typical elementary class on an in-person day, you can see here. So cohort A, again, students whose last names would end with A to LE, would come to school on Monday and Tuesday. And in the morning, they would go through a variety of learning activities. And the example provided here, really around reading, writing, and math. As you can also see, it is one of our primary concerns. We have built in mask and movement breaks. As the weather still remains warm, wearing a mask can be completely uncomfortable, and sitting in a chair for an extended period of time is never really desirable for young children. So we have built those things in there. For those students who are in person in the morning, they would be dismissed from school right around lunchtime. Prior to lunch, we have a grab and go program ready to go to help feed students. But then they would go home, and then they would come back to their learning together. And both cohorts that were in school and out of school would combine. There would be an asynchronous remote activity. Again, in this example, it's either a science or social studies lesson. And then it would be followed by another synchronous activity that could involve one of their specials, art, music, PE, or such. And that activity could be synchronous or asynchronous, depending upon the lesson. And their day would end with a synchronous end of the day meeting with their teacher, so that both cohorts would have that moment at the end of the day to wrap up with their teacher. As you can see, it's almost the identical schedule for the second cohort, cohort B, but they just come to school on Thursday and Friday. Otherwise, it looks very similar. Next slide, please. The converse of that is what happens when they're at home in a remote learning environment. At the elementary, you can see on Monday and Tuesday when cohort A is in school, cohort B is working remotely. And they would start their day with a synchronous morning meeting with their classroom teacher. And then they would move into another synchronous activity, not run by their classroom teacher, but by either a math or a reading specialist or other personnel in the building. In this example, it would focus on reading or math, but there are other activities as well that could be provided synchronously. Similar to their peers in school, there are a couple breaks that are built in so that they too can move. But then you can see there's another synchronous meeting that has a specialist involved or a reading or math activity. We've talked a lot about the software that were purchased. In fact, at Monday's school committee meeting, we talked about a specific one, Dreambox, and how a lot of the software now is adaptive, meaning it adjusts what it is providing students based on their skill level, which makes it much more engaging for students and much more productive in terms of their learning. After the second break, there'd be a synchronous meeting with support staff for social emotional learning and other synchronous, asynchronous activities around their academics. They too would get a break for lunch and a chance to run outside and do what they need to do before coming back to their classmates in the afternoon. Very similar to, this is the second half of what cohort A was doing. In the morning, cohort A was in person, but in the afternoon, both cohorts A and cohort B are working remotely, either both synchronously with a classroom teacher or on some asynchronous activities. You can see the opposite is true on Thursday and Friday, but this gives you a flavor for what the remote learning days at the elementary school would look like. Wednesday has a combination of support blocks. It's all in the morning, some synchronous morning meetings with the teacher, and other activities that lead up until around lunchtime, which is the end of the day at the elementary level. Next slide, please. In terms of middle school, we've put out a couple iterations of the schedule, moving some things around. The real primary focus of the middle school is that only certain classes are being taught in person, and ELA, math, science, and social studies are those courses. What this provides us is the opportunity to provide synchronous instruction in almost every single class that a middle school student will receive. The cohorts, again, identical to the elementary, A through LE on Monday and Tuesday, LI through Z on Thursday and Friday, with the same Wednesday asynchronous schedule. Again, trying to align things so families can plan more effectively. This is an example of a sixth grade schedule. And you can see on Monday and Tuesday where it is yellow, that cohort is in school. On Monday they get English, math, social studies, and science in a row. And then on Tuesday they get math, social studies, and science and ELA in a row while they're in person. You can see in the afternoon, there are some asynchronous classes such as physical education and art and health, and then also an advisory period. What is unique about the middle school schedule is there are other classes that you can see. The second cohort, cohort B, would be remote on Monday and Tuesday. Their morning is synchronous instruction in music, synchronous instruction in PE, some asynchronous work in social studies and science before going back to synchronous work in art and health, and again, some asynchronous work in English and math. The afternoon for that particular cohort is synchronous in nature in the major subject areas of science, English, math, and social studies. So again, the goal for us was to provide as much synchronous instruction as possible, and we accomplished this by teaching only certain subjects in person. Next slide, please. This is an example of, for the middle school, what the Wednesday would look like. Again, it is a combination of synchronous and asynchronous work. There's some broad building-based activities that would go along with this, including clubs and activities. But you can see that they would also have a lot of asynchronous work and an opportunity to get some resource support during the Wednesday block as well. Next slide, please. At the high school, what we're presenting at this point is slightly different given what Dr. Hackett has mentioned at the beginning, and that is that the high school will open in a full remote schedule. Because of that, you don't see any cohort at home or any cohort in person, but this is the schedule that we would also use should we transition and when we transition to a hybrid model. So you can see that the high school schedule is a 6-period schedule. It meets in order on Monday, slightly rotated on Tuesday, and then Thursday mirrors Monday and Friday mirrors Tuesday. And we do that for a couple reasons in terms of lining up curriculum so that the teachers can sequence things. On Wednesday, again, there's administrative directed time, meaning that while teachers are preparing, the administration can provide full building activities, including advisory and clubs. And then there's also some blocks in the afternoon for not only learning center and guidance, but also PE. The majority of our high school students would have 5 classes in the schedule, and their PE would be scheduled within one of those 6 blocks that are identified. However, we do have students that take a full 6 academic classes, and so they would need to get their PE in the afternoon on Wednesdays. So again, this is a remote schedule completely, which is different than the middle school schedule that was shown and the elementary schedule that was shown. Thank you.
Need to unmute. Thank you, Mr. Lee. And so we will now get into our pre-K through 5 programs and services with Dr. Kippenham.
Good evening, everyone. Here we have a description of the preschool special education programs. We have 2 types of programs. One program services are language-based and students with developmental needs. And you'll notice that both of the preschool programs operate 4 days per week. The language-based and developmental programs will operate in one 2.5 hour session per day. One session is early in the morning, 7:50 to 10:20. The afternoon session is 11:20 to 1:50. And again, that's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. The ABA programs are programs that are servicing children with global developmental and spectrum needs. And those programs will also run Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday for 4 hours. And we anticipate that they will operate between 7:50 a.m. and 11:50 a.m. And both of those programs are slated to start on 9/17. In this slide, these are descriptions of the programs at the elementary level across our district. You'll notice that these programs are running 4 days a week instead of 2 days per week. These are for our students that receive specialized instruction from special education teachers throughout their day. And we anticipate that they will join us 4 hours on those 4 days, and that their start date will be on 9/16, and they will receive 1 day of remote instruction. For our kiddos that receive related services, they'll be in the typical remote model where they will receive 2 half days of in-person instruction and the 3 remote days. If you could advance the slide, please. Our in-person services at the elementary level will be delivered in a clinic model, which I'll describe in the next slide. And some services may be delivered within class. We'll do our best to avoid removing students from their core academic subjects, reading and math, while they are present at school. There is a possibility that we may be able to deliver service at the end of their day, so after their half day or possibly on Wednesday. And that's going to be contingent upon transportation availability. When we are delivering service to children in person, we're going to prioritize kiddos that have barriers to remote instruction, and those might be because they're at developmental levels that make that difficult, or they might not have adult facilitation at home. So we'll prioritize those kiddos for in-person instruction. Our inclusion might happen when our kiddos are with their in-person cohort. It could also happen during the synchronous live sessions that Mr. Lee described. When kiddos are remote but their teacher is live, our kiddos could also include in those sessions. Much of our focus at first will be establishing relationships with our kiddos, because our little guys are the most challenged at accessing remote instruction. And if we're able to build relationships with them, they'll have a better time accessing, especially if we end up in a remote situation in the future. We'll also be focusing on teaching remote access skills while we have our kiddos in person. If we're able to troubleshoot and build skills while we're there, they'll do better when they're in their remote sessions. If you could advance the slide, please. That clinic model that I talked about, if you think about a time that perhaps you hurt your foot and went to physical therapy, you probably went to a clinic and received a service, and then you went home. So we're conceptualizing some of our service delivery in the same model, that students would receive their services in a single controlled location. We're still managing the 6-foot distance. And in some treatment spaces, that will allow us to do small group work if we're still able to maintain that 6-foot distance. In other spaces, it might mean that our kiddos have to receive service one-to-one. For some of our guys in elementary, we're using specialized personal protective equipment. So for example, our speech therapists might wear a clear mask so kids could see their face if they're working on articulation and things like that. This model will minimize student therapist contact. So rather than having a therapist be in a large group and then contact another large group of kiddos, this will minimize that. And it will be a therapist-controlled environment, and all the materials and resources will be in one location, so they'll have an easier time managing that, and it minimizes the transition of therapists through the building. If you could advance the slide, please. Our remote services could be delivered both synchronously and asynchronously. Synchronously, we could meet with kiddos via Google Meet, either individually or in a small group, to deliver specialized services. We could also, our special services staff could join the general education classes when they meet synchronously to support our kiddos. We might also deliver activities and resources asynchronously, so families could access those at times that work best for them. If you could advance the slide, please. Evaluations. Special education evaluations we're working on both remotely and in person when the school year commences. Again, that clinic model comes up that I mentioned. Rather than pulling children from their core academic instructional time, we're looking to create a situation in which we might be able to provide those evaluations on a student's asynchronous day, or on Wednesdays, or perhaps after their in-person instructional time, or on Saturdays if that is feasible. And there are many variables that go into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kipian. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our grades 6 through 12 programs and services with Dr. Peter Platt.
Good evening, everyone. So great. So The services that we're providing at South and East Middle School include the Link Substantially Separate program at South and the REACH program at East, being cohorted within the program, and attending school Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday with an anticipated start time in that orientation timeframe that Mr. Lee referenced, 9:16 through 9:18. The middle school special educations that would include resource pathways, links inclusion, bridge, and language-based, where students are included in the general ed environment. Those programs, the students would be cohorted 2 days per week according to the alphabetized reference that Mr. Lee provided. Again, in coordination with the building starts and the orientation days between 9:16 and 9:18. I believe the middle school schedule, the arrival time is 7:50, students being dismissed at 11:50. And we are working on options for students remaining after school after the 11:50 dismissal to receive in-person services if feasible. Next slide. In terms of the high school special education programs, we are able to bring back the programs with students who have the most intense special needs to Braintree High School using the exterior rooms. We would be bringing Strives, Prove, Wave, and Launch back for 4 days a week in cohorts, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, again with an anticipated start time of 9:16 to 9:17 in coordination with the orientation days at the high school. The Coast, Compass, Learning Center, Language Enrichment, Career Exploration, Achieve, Alliance, and PMI programs would remain fully remote until 10/13. And it's our, what we anticipate is that we will be able to, as the district phases students in, have students phase into an in-person model. Again, it would be in the schedule that Mr. Lee referenced. So students in Strives, Prove, Wave, and Launch would arrive at the high school for a 7:35 start, as would be typical at the high school, and would be dismissed at 11:10. And when they return home, those students would receive asynchronous and synchronous instruction after dismissal. So related services are very similar to what Dr. Kippenham described. So at the secondary level, related services to in-person programs, we would again prioritize students who can't access remote learning. We would schedule to minimize transitions and contacts, and we would use a combination of in-person, remote, and clinic model services contingent upon schedules and availability of students during the day. For the related service programs starting remote, we would, if feasible, schedule remote services with students during asynchronous learning time for synchronous remote service delivery. So for example, Google Meet. We would look at asynchronous activities and Google Meet one-to-one or small group to support asynchronous assignments. And in terms of supporting the Braintree High School students who are in a full remote start, the programs are organizing in-person socially distant orientations for 9th graders to meet liaisons. Across both middle schools and the high school, teams of resource and language-based teachers have developed executive functioning support materials, which are going to be available on a Google site for students, parents, and general education teachers. And the goal is to support students in learning to manage both a fully remote program, but also that hybrid in-person and remote program that the middle school students will be in. For the high school students who have Learning Center in the remote start, that will be scheduled, and they will have synchronous Google Meets during that block. And as Mr. Lee referenced, the Learning Center teachers will have office hours asynchronously, office hours on the asynchronous Wednesday to provide support as needed.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Platt. We will now move into questions. And again, I would just ask that you ask one question, try to stay with one question. We'll get through as many as we can. And there are 16 hands up right now. So we should be able to loop back and get to a second question if you have it. But we would like to make sure we get through everyone at least one time. Again, these questions or this question and answer session should be more general and specific related to the presentation we just gave you, and they should not be focused on your individual child, understanding that you may have questions about your child's program, but we will provide other opportunities and other ways to communicate around individual situations. So with that, we will start as soon as I can get started. We will start with Natalie Danatono. Please forgive me if I mess your name up.
D'Antuno.
D'Antuno, thank you. Yep.
So there's the REACH program at the middle school. They also are supposed to go to social studies and science. Is that going to happen in person?
So what we're looking at is the students who are scheduled to have that inclusion experience and the safest way to provide that. And we're in discussion with the principal and the nurses about whether students who are in the REACH program in the self-contained cohort will be able to push into a general ed social studies class into another cohort. So I wouldn't be able to answer that specifically because we're looking at individual student schedules, and we're in discussion with the principal of East Middle School and the nurses about the feasibility of that.
Great, thank you. Dawn Whitney.
Hi, I have a question about elementary age kids who may choose the remote plan. I don't think I heard how the IEP services will be delivered for those children.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be happy to answer that one. We will be providing some options for our kiddos in the remote cohort. We certainly can provide remote synchronous opportunities. So that would be a therapist connecting with kiddos via Google Meet. We also may be able to offer, depending upon the kiddos' needs, if in the extended day they were able to access a service in person, if that was preferable, then that might be an option as well. If families were not able to access a synchronous Google Meet, we'd be happy to provide some asynchronous activities and resources for kiddos on IEPs in the remote program.
Thank you. Monique Collins.
Oh, thank you. One of my questions was just answered, so thank you. My other question is, I'm just a little confused with the remote versus the hybrid as far as like the amount of asynchronous versus synchronous time and how it all works. I feel like you did a really good job explaining the hybrid. I'm just confused. If we had chosen the remote, would they still have the same amount of synchronous time? Because obviously they won't be there the 2 half days, but would that be built into their schedule another way?
The quick answer to that is yes.
Okay.
During the times when the hybrid students would be in class, we would have other staff assigned to those students who had chosen the full remote and be working with them in a synchronous fashion at that point in time. So they would receive almost the identical amount of synchronous instruction. We are looking at a couple of ways that we're going to schedule it. But while the hybrid kids are in school, there would be another teacher assigned to the remote kids and working with them directly.
All right, thank you. Joanne Allen.
Hello, sorry, I was on mute.
No,
For
that's
the
good.
kids that are going to East and they're in 5th grade, what model are they following? Because when you went over middle school, you said 6 to 8. I'm just curious about 5th graders.
Good question, thank you.
Yeah, and in the schedule I showed on the screen was just an example of a 6th grade schedule. The 5th graders at East would follow a similar schedule, obviously not identical. Some of the classes are a little bit different in the 5th grade program as they are in the 7th and 8th grade program. But in general terms, they look very similar.
Thank you, Carrie Burke. Carrie, you are unmuted on our end. Whoop. We, well, lost Carrie. Kim Hulk.
Hi, I just have a quick question around testing and reevaluation for those kids that were due to be reevaluated back in March and April. Is there a timeline yet of when that is expected to start once they're back in school?
Thank you.
Could answer that. We're starting to go, well, we've been going over, we have a backlog, obviously, of a lot of students that need reevaluation and initial evaluations. So we're prioritizing going, to the ones that hadn't been done and trying to work through those as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you. Nicole Gabriel.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for taking my question. I appreciate it.
Certainly.
My quick question is, if we choose the 5-day remote program at the middle school level, will the children be still assigned a cohort, and on those remote days still be able to see some of the other children? How will that schedule look versus the kids that are doing hybrid?
So there are a couple of scenarios that play out in that model. Depending upon the number of children who want a full remote model, we would have complete sections of a class that are fully remote and a teacher assigned to them. So that would be the cohort. Their full remote peers would be the kids in that. Let's use the example of a math class. They'd all stay together and they'd be with the teacher. There are other classes where the numbers might not justify that, at which point during the remote classes that they all attend, they would be with their hybrid peers, but during the hybrid days when kids are in school, they would be assigned a different teacher to provide them the content for just those 2 classes.
Okay, thank you. Lisa Adams.
Hi, thank you. So I have an 8th grader at South Middle School, and I see that there's only one block, 1 day a week designated for resource. Just trying to find out, I guess, when I would get more information, because I know you can't give specific information for my child today, but I don't even see where there's any blocks allowable for any more resource time.
Okay, thank you.
I can answer that question. So it would depend on your child's schedule, and we would discuss whether that student could stay after the dismissal to receive services after the other students go home. There are also some choices to make in terms of whether to receive services during the day, but we would be having those at an individual level based on what your preference is.
Okay, thank you. Ross McDonald.
Hi, it's his wife, Allison.
Oh, hi.
We've heard about the disputes with the teachers union, and I'm wondering if these in-person schedules are basically definite or if they're reliant upon the negotiations sort of being successful with the union, especially for kids who really can't get services that are remote.
Good question. So while I can't comment publicly about the negotiation process because it is a confidential process, I can tell you that in my opinion, we're making very good progress. We are still talking. In fact, we had a session yesterday, today, and we have several more next week. Regardless, in terms of services, we will need to make sure that we're providing services. So regardless of what happens with anything, we still need to provide services, and we'll figure out how to do that. But again, I'm very optimistic that we will be, the schedule that you see will be the schedules that we'll be implementing, understanding that there obviously can be changes. One of the things that I will mention also, just while we're here, we are still working on transportation. We know that we can transport students who are more than 2 miles away from school to their home schools in grades 1 through 6. We are currently figuring out how to run a separate independent kindergarten run, which would essentially be a door-to-door pickup to both home schools and to Manadequate. And we are working right now also obviously on special education transportation, which we will be providing, but we don't have all the details yet of that. We do know which students are planning to come back and which ones are planning to go remote. So that's where we are with those 2 those two items. Lynn McPhail?
Hi, thank you. I have a bunch of questions regarding the Achieve program of the high school.
Yep.
And I don't know if there's going to be a separate meeting for the Achieve program, or if you know details. For example, you showed the high school schedule, how it rotates, starting with A block, some days D block another day. I don't know if Achieve is going to rotate or not. So I don't know if you know specific questions about Achieve or if there will be a separate meeting.
Sure, okay.
We're working on that at the high school level. So the teachers were preparing their curriculum for delivery in a remote setting, and the Achieve teachers, as well as the Alliance teachers, are configuring their schedule so that education can be best served remotely and then transitioned to an in-person model. So they are working on that, and we will be in touch with information about how that program intends to operate.
Right. I may need help with your name. Apologize if I hack it to get death here. Tanya Esvedo.
Hi, it's my email, Acevedo. It's okay though.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I have a question. Well, obviously, what is there a reason why the language-based program schedule is different from elementary to middle school? As like elementary is going 4 days and middle school is only allowed 2 days, and it looks like the resource block is only on Wednesdays.
Okay, thank you.
So the reason that the primary reason for the difference is that at the elementary school, the students are cohorted, and at the middle school, the students take inclusion classes. So it's really for safety purposes in the pandemic to create a safe situation for students to continue to go into those inclusion classes. So having them stay with their cohort to access those classes on the 2 in-person days is safer than not allowing them to take inclusion classes and making them substantially separate again for 4 days.
All right, thank you. Mindy O'Leary.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry.
You can, no worries.
Perfect. So I just have a question regarding the services. I know they said that they may be grouping the services, while they're in school, in the classroom. However, if the IEP calls for the child to be pulled out in a small group, if you're in LB class, there's only 8 or 9 kids in the class, but that still wouldn't consist as a small group. So are they going to be able to not count that as one of the speech lessons that they're giving throughout the day, or are you guys going to try to include that as part of the IEP services?
Okay, thank you.
We plan to deliver services as are delineated on the IEP. In particular, children that are cohorted in the language-based program. That is not a huge group of children. And if all of them are leaving their cohort to access the same therapist, the contacts would be equivalent of that therapist entering a small classroom. So there may be opportunities to do service within those small cohorts, or opportunities to take children out in small cohorts to receive therapies. But the goal will be to deliver services as prescribed on the IEP.
Michelle Hinthorn.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My question is for the students that struggled with remote learning in terms of attending back in the spring. My question is there a plan in place for either a BCBA involvement in the event that that arises again for a child that has to be full remote?
Thank you.
I'm not sure how the BCBA might help, but we know that this is a beginning plan. We hope to bring students back, in as soon as we can safely to get much more in-person instruction. So we know that a lot of students have struggled with remote learning, and you know, the objective is to increase in-person instruction as soon as we can.
Okay. Ying Hong.
Hi. So I have a question. Back in August, there was like a survey sent out for like preferences of full-day remote or returning in hybrid model or returning to like a specialized program. So I choose like returning with a specialized program for my first grader going to Hollis. Somehow the survey didn't go through. I got a call on Monday verifying that my first grader is returning school, like what they claim is like 2 days in person hybrid model. But on the slide that you guys present earlier, like I saw there's like 4 days in person with IEP, like language based. So I'm confused, like is my first grader gonna be back for like 2 days in person and 3 days remote, or 4 days in person, or is that should I call Hollis to directly to verify the coming schedules?
Well, I'll have someone answer the question now in general terms, but certainly reaching out to Hollis works too.
Yep. If you would like to email me with your kiddo's name, then I can definitely help you with your kiddo's schedule. If a child is placed in one of our specialized programs, like the language-based program at the Hollis School, then we would be offering 4 days in person. So that's 4 half days in person. So if your kiddo is already placed in that program, that's certainly an option for you. If they're not placed in a program, then and you wanted in-person instruction, then it would be the hybrid model.
All right, Sheila Corcoran.
Hi, thank you.
Sure.
So I'm calling in reference specifically to the high school programs. I recognize that some of the high school programs are being offered in person, and I understand a second group of high school programs are being offered in person, but at a reduced time frame. I think one group was 4 days, one group was 2 days. But then there's a large portion of the high school program that is completely remote at all. And I'm wondering why those programs like Learning Center, Alliance, Achieve, Compass, any of those programs were not offered any in-person time. I recognize you have building constraints, but I'm concerned that no in-person time was offered to those programs.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I could answer that. The in-person, the programs that are in person are students with more severe disabilities. That's the state guidance. That's what we wanted to do, you know, from the beginning. So there'll be more to come on some of the alternative programs, as Dr. Platt had mentioned.
Okay. Jimmy Lee.
Hi there. This is actually his wife, Marianne, but he says you have a great name.
He is absolutely correct.
Yes.
So I think the gentleman just asked our question, but I wanted to confirm because so we also have a first grader in the Hollis language-based program. And so we just want to clarify. So 4 days, half days in person is an option for our first grader? Is that
That's
correct?
the program. That is the
Yes.
program. Yes.
That's great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Say
you.
hi to your husband. Okay, we're at 7:24. I'm going to extend it beyond 7:30 by a few minutes because we got a little bit of a late start waiting. But we have currently 16 hands up. I would ask, I see some of you we have called on before, if you could, if you've already had a chance to ask a question, if you could put your hands down, and then let's get through as many first-time questions as we can, and then we will try to get back through to a second round. So we'll go to Tara Crispin.
Hi there. I had a quick question. Will there be any, teacher to parent outreach to better prepare those students with, more severe disabilities? Better preparation to go back to school, such as, the language used for washing hands and mask removal, things like that. Social stories.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Especially our kiddos that we know are going to struggle with social distance and mask wearing. We have school psychologists, special education teachers, and behavior analysts that will be working with families to help transition back to school. They've already started during these 10 professional development days prepping materials for kiddos and for families, because we know some of our kiddos are going to need a little bit of preparation because school is going to look a little bit different. So if we are getting closer to the beginning of school and you plan to send your kiddo back in person, the special education teacher that your child is assigned to will be reaching out with some materials and some preparation.
All right, thank you. Molly Morley.
Hi, I have a question regarding language-based in Hollis. Will those students integrate into a gen ed classroom, or will they remain self-contained in their own cohort while in school?
Okay, thank you.
I think there's going to be a mix of inclusion based on the child's individual ability, because some of our kiddos at the Hollis language-based program are able to access quite a bit of inclusion in a general setting, and some of our kiddos need more adult support, in which they might do better on the asynchronous inclusion. So I think there will probably be a combination based on the student's individual ability.
All right, thank you. Megan Ford.
Hi, I was wondering for kids that are, I guess, preschool who are not in the preschool program but receive services. So will they still be going to receive one-on-one in-person services?
Okay, thank you.
Sure. There will be options for kiddos that receive a single service from the preschool. We're certainly offering in-person service. If families would prefer remote service, we can try that live synchronously with preschoolers, or we can provide some asynchronous activities for family and family training and support around the child's individual needs. So we're offering both.
All right, thank you. Teresa Sudek. Teresa, you are unmuted.
Okay. Hi. I know we're not supposed to do individual, but I have a high schooler on the spectrum who shut down last year when it came to remote learning, got his therapist involved in everything, and he's not in one of these 3 programs. He's never going to start school on the 13th or remote. What do I do?
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I think you disappeared. So we do intend to reach out to you. I know we had a discussion earlier this week, so we will be in touch to discuss your son.
All right, Laura Lee Willard. Laura Lee, you are unmuted. Okay, no. All right, we will move on. I'm seeing a couple names with hands up that I think I've already called on. Karen Downing. Karen, okay.
Thank you for taking my question.
Certainly.
My son is going into 6th grade up at South. And I guess I know we're not supposed to ask specific questions about our kids.
Yep.
But I'm just wondering, with the 2 half days, if the teachers see that the need is not being met on the 2 half days, is it an option for those children to go 4?
Okay, thank you.
So I think what we would do before we looked at going for 4 days, because again, that would create extensive contacts, and we are not reducing services for any other reason than we want to create a safe situation in school. We are looking at Wednesdays and after school as opportunities for students to potentially receive services, but that would be on an individualized basis and in communication with your liaison at South and the building coordinator at South.
All right, thank you. Diana Santiago.
Hi. I'm just wondering when we should expect to hear about our individual child and how, I'm thinking specifically of a child who's on a remote, or I'm sorry, hybrid. He'll be attending hybrid, has some pullouts, like when we would hear how that's going to be done, whether it's during those 2 days or after school or, on one of his remote days. Just a time frame for when we can expect to hear about our individual child about those things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. I think as Dr. Platt just mentioned, we're looking at a number of creative ways to provide additional services. Certainly, after the regular school hours on Wednesdays, we even discussed a little bit about Saturdays. So you'll hear more about that once your child, starts the program or starts school, and how much additional support he or she might need.
Right. Amy Handoran. Hi, Amy, you are unmuted. You still need to unmute on your end.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you broke it up a little bit, but hopefully you might want to turn your video off because sometimes that will interfere with the bandwidth.
Okay. All right, check. So my question is about students who have para support written into their IEP. How are they getting that support for their remote days? Because my husband and I will be at work and will not be able to offer the amount of support we offered March through June.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Platt?
I was going to ask her what level her child was at. But she is gone. I don't know if Milo or Jeff want to.
Can you speak to it in general, maybe by level?
I think so the question was para support on remote days to provide assistance with the remote work.
Right.
So again, as Mr. Rubin referenced, we're trying to configure staff schedules and para schedules and look at ways that paras can provide support. But I think that would be a discussion that would best be had with that particular parent and the liaison. I think that would potentially look different depending on that student's disabilities.
Okay, thank you. All right, it is, we have, it's 7:35. We'll go about another 5 minutes so. There are 14 hands up still. I would once again just ask you respectfully if you could lower your hand if you've already asked a question so that we can get people on who have not yet had a chance. and my memory is getting a little bit taxed. I'm not quite as nimble as I used to be when I was younger, or was getting more sleep. So Danielle Bertoldi.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to confirm.
Sorry, Daniel, sorry. My eyes are going too, Daniel, so.
No, that's all right, no problem. The freshman special eds program, my son's going into the Strives program. So I just wanted to confirm, is that 4 days?
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yep, that'll be 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, for a half day.
All right. Danielle Ricketts.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Real quick, and this has already been touched upon, but just want some clarification if possible for the language-based students going into middle school. I have a 6th grader going into the 6th grade language-based program. A little concerned that it's only 2 days versus the 4 days. Obviously, that's dramatically less in-person instruction. So I'm just wondering, could you please describe what the service delivery will look like for the days when these kiddos are trying to learn remotely, both asynchronously and synchronously with the service delivery? I'm kind of confused what that would look like. Could you just describe that, please?
Sure, thank you.
We are working with the guidance departments at South and at East. They are still working on student schedules. And once they have the student schedules configured and the teacher schedules configured, we will have a better plan for how we will use all of the staff to provide students with the services that they need.
Okay, I'm going to do the best I can. Carrie Mastro Giacomo.
Yep, Master Giacomo, that's fine.
That was so close.
It's very close.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to ask, I have a child on an IEP both at the middle school and the high school level, but I wanted to ask specifically for high school just because they are in fact full remote. So she's in the language enrichment, which doesn't fall into one of the programs to receive any additional days or services or anything. So I just am wondering where these kids fall that are still in fact on an IEP, but not in one of these programs that require or are getting these services as the other programs are, either in full remote or once they finally get to hybrid. What will that look like, and where in the schedule is it built in for any in-service deliveries?
Okay, thank you.
So the high school language-based program will operate as it always has with the language-based staff as the primary teachers. So the students will have the same type of schedule that they have as all of the other high school students, because as you know, in the language-based program at the high school, about 75% of those students take general education classes. So the students, if they were scheduled to have a language enrichment, English, math, science, or social studies class, or a learning strategies class, or a college and career readiness class, they would continue to have that with the language enrichment program teachers. If a student were able and scheduled into a general ed history class or math class or English class, they would continue to have that. And of course, all of those classes are configured to meet the service delivery in a student's IEP. The speech language pathologist will, as the slide indicated, be providing speech language services remotely. So that language-based program at the high school, it's all the same program teachers and the same services in a remote format, as Mr. Lee mentioned, with the synchronous and asynchronous Google instruction according with how the high school is doing that. And then in terms of the language-based program at the middle schools, again, those students are primarily included in general ed classes, and so they would be included in their general ed classes. And if they had language-based services, those would be scheduled as much as possible not to conflict with their content area classes, but also utilizing the time after dismissal and potentially on Wednesday to provide the reading, speech language, and other services that students in the language-based programs typically get.
All right, thank you. We have time for one more. Patricia Sandin.
Hi, I just wanted some clarification on the remarks about individual IEPs. So are we being told that our individual IEPs will be more reactive than proactive? Like they have to start school and see where they fall and what they'll need?
Okay, thank you.
No, the IEPs are going to be followed. What I meant by that was we have to see what the schedules look like, but if, say, a student has speech twice a week, then, they would get speech twice a week, but we just have to, get in there and get the schedules going. We're trying to avoid pulling them out of, like English or math or any of the classes, but we hope to do work with students after school hours, after everyone else is dismissed, on Wednesdays, and I'm not sure about Saturdays, but we have been kicking that around. But they should be getting the same amount of service as they normally would.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for showing up. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We made a pretty good run at it though. I do just want to show you, this is our website. It's actually just kind of relaunched a new design, new site, but it is still braintreeschools.org. And if you go to departments, you'll see several, including support services. And then you have these across this menu, special services, and then you can see that you can contact the special education department, this is just clicking on the name will get you the email. So again, very, very much appreciate you showing up this evening. I know there's a lot of individual questions yet. I know there's still some unanswered questions. We are, just want you to know that we are working as quickly as we can. Some of this has really been dependent on a lot of other things, including facilities and scheduling. So hopefully you can stick with us and be patient as you can. And we will continue to work hard to answer your questions and make sure that you and your children are in good shape when we open. So thank you very much and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.